In 2006, a Stanford psychiatrist named Reiss placed subjects in an fMRI machine and showed them cartoons. He wanted to see what a joke actually looks like inside the human brain. What he found was striking. When a participant found a cartoon funny, the scan lit up in the nucleus accumbens, the exact same reward circuitry involved in cocaine, financial windfalls, and sugar consumption. We experience laughter as spontaneous, a sudden burst of joy, but beneath that reflex is a surprisingly rigorous neurological and evolutionary architecture. Today, we are looking at the science of funny and asking, why do we laugh? How did humor evolve from primate play signals into stand-up comedy? We will examine the mechanics of a joke, the biological purpose of comedy, and why a good sense of humor may be one of evolution's most impressive flexes. Joining me is Bobby Cochran, author, humorist, certified hypnotist, and practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming. Bobby, let us start with the hardware. What is actually happening in the brain when we hear a joke?
The brain treats a joke like a cognitive puzzle, and it processes that puzzle in stages. Neuroscientists, including researchers in a 2023 study published in Brain Sciences by Chang and colleagues, break humor into two distinct phases: comprehension and appreciation. Comprehension comes first. You hear the setup, and your brain begins predicting where the sentence is going. Then the punchline arrives and shatters that prediction. That incongruity activates the frontal and temporal lobes as the brain scrambles to resolve the contradiction. Once the hidden meaning clicks into place, the process moves into appreciation. That is where the reward circuitry comes online. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala help signal the brain's reward system, and dopamine gets released into the nucleus accumbens. In simple terms, your brain rewards you for successfully detecting an anomaly and realizing that it is harmless.
If humor is a reward for recognizing a harmless anomaly, then it sounds less like entertainment and more like a survival mechanism. It sounds like our brains are actively giving us a chemical treat for realizing we are not in danger.
That is exactly the point. To understand the survival function of humor, we have to go back before language. Laughter did not begin as wit. It began as play. Primatologist Marina Davila-Ross and other researchers at the University of Portsmouth have documented that great apes produce panting rhythmic vocalizations during rough and tumble play, and even when being tickled. Tickling, in this context, is basically a mock attack. It simulates danger. When chimpanzees wrestle, those vocalizations communicate that the aggression is not real. It is not a fight to the death. It is play. In other words, the signal says the danger is fake. Over time, as human cognition became more complex, we moved from physical play to intellectual play. We stopped just wrestling with bodies and started wrestling with ideas, social norms, and language. That evolutionary leap sets the stage for how we process humor today.
That progression from physical tickling to intellectual boundary pushing is fascinating. It points directly to Peter McGraw's benign violation theory. Peter McGraw is a behavioral scientist at the University of Colorado who back in 2010 proposed his theory as a kind of unified explanation for humor.
He did. He and Caleb Owren argued that humor happens when three specific conditions are met simultaneously. First, there has to be a violation, something that threatens your sense of how the world is supposed to be. Second, the situation must be benign. It has to be harmless, safe, or acceptable. Third, both of those perceptions must happen at exactly the same time. If the violation is too severe, you get disgust, fear, or offense. If it is too benign, you get boredom. Humor lives in that narrow sweet spot where a norm is broken but no actual harm is done. And when you map that onto the primate research, it makes perfect sense. The mock attack is the violation, and the trust between the apes makes it benign.
I keep getting stuck on the idea that violation is always required. Does that really hold? I look at something like absurdist humor, a total non sequitur, and I struggle to see what norm is being threatened there.
That is a fair challenge, but in this framework, violation is defined very broadly. It is not limited to moral or physical danger. It can also mean a violation of linguistic, logical, or social expectations. A non sequitur violates the expected sequence of thought. A pun violates the structural rules of language. Absurd humor violates the brain's expectation that communication will proceed in a coherent, orderly way. So perhaps threat is too dramatic a word for modern humor. Anomaly may be more accurate. The brain is a prediction engine. When a prediction fails, the brain flags it. If the failure appears dangerous, we get anxious. If it appears harmless, we get amused. That dopamine release is the biological reward for correctly categorizing the anomaly as safe. It is the brain giving itself a pat on the back for staying alert without wasting energy on panic.
So comedy is essentially a hack of our threat detection hardware. Comedians are manufacturing benign anomalies in real time to trigger a room full of dopamine responses.
Precisely. And comedians use specific tools to make sure the violation stays benign. McGraw's work highlights a few major ways this happens: psychological distance, weak commitment to the norm being violated, and alternative interpretations. Distance is why we say comedy is tragedy plus time. A disaster from 100 years ago may be jokeable. A disaster from yesterday usually is not. The comedian has to calibrate that distance carefully. Too much violation, and the audience recoils. Too much safety, and the joke collapses into blandness.
I cannot help noticing how much that overlaps with your background in neuro-linguistic programming. You are manipulating expectations and reframing reality in real time.
There is a massive overlap. In neuro-linguistic programming, we talk about pattern interrupts. A person is moving along a familiar cognitive track. Then something suddenly breaks the pattern and forces the brain to pause and recalibrate. A punchline is a master class in pattern interruption. You guide the listener down a highly predictable linguistic path, and at the moment they feel certain about the destination, you pull the rug out from under them. That moment of disruption forces the brain to reprocess the entire setup. Regions involved in language and meaning processing work harder during that split second because the brain is frantically searching for context that makes the new information fit.
It is remarkable how mechanical it sounds when we break it down. We think of humor as magical, but in some ways it is a highly sophisticated algorithm for processing incongruity.
It is mechanical at the neurological level, but socially it is incredibly fluid. Laughter is fundamentally a social signal. We laugh far more when we are with other people than when we are alone. Humor helps test boundaries, establish trust, and signal in-group belonging. If I tell a dark joke and you laugh, we have just identified a shared boundary. We have silently agreed on what we both consider a benign violation. That creates a bond.
Though there is a darker side to that. Humor can create an in-group precisely by defining an out-group. If a joke violates a norm that someone else holds sacred, humor becomes a weapon.
That is absolutely true. Humor can be exclusionary. McGraw's research on norm commitment makes that clear. If someone jokes about a religious institution, a person outside that belief system may find the violation benign and laugh. A devout follower may experience it as offensive or even hostile. The laughter itself becomes a boundary marker. It tells you who feels safe inside the joke and who does not. But even when humor functions as a weapon, it is still using the same biological hardware. The in-group is signaling safety to each other, even if that safety comes at the expense of an outsider.
So it still comes back to that primate play signal. The chimpanzees panting to say we are just playing has evolved into humans laughing to say, at least for this moment, we are on the same side.
That's right.
The complexity of the ideas has changed, but the underlying biological function remains surprisingly consistent.
Exactly. That is the beautiful contradiction of humor. It requires some form of tension, disruption, or anomaly to exist, but its successful expression proves that we are safe enough to play with it. Whether you are looking at Alan Reiss's brain scans, Marina Davila-Ross's tickled apes, or McGraw's benign violation theory, the conclusion is remarkably consistent. Humor is not a distraction from reality. It is a highly evolved tool for surviving it. It turns uncertainty into relief, tension into play, and fear into connection.
That is a remarkable place to leave it. I'd like to thank our guest, Bobby Cochran, for helping us to see humor as a survival tool, a way of turning fear into connection and surprise into social glue, and reminding us all to keep a light heart and don't forget to play nice with the other kids.